Hello everyone, my name is Serena Chang, and I am a senior studying marketing and finance. My scholarly project is taking a deeper look into Asian and Asian Americans at Purdue University, the history, diversity, persistent myths, and needed actions at the context of Purdue University and the Midwest. So this is going to be the outline for the presentation today. I'm going to start with an overview of the history of AAPI immigration and activism. AAPI stands for Asian American, and Pacific Islander. And then I will briefly talk about Asians and Asian Americans at Purdue, and then the research and analysis will also be covered at the end. A brief history on Asian and Asian Americans in the United States. So beginning in the 1850s, Chinese immigrants arrived on the West Coast during the California Gold Rush through Angel Island, which is pictured here, for gold mining and to help build the Transcontinental Railroad. They were the ideal immigrant because they were considered as cheap labor and worked quickly and efficiently to build the railroad. The Chinese Exclusion Act was implemented in 1882 to restrict the amount of immigrants coming to the United States because they had started to take on more American jobs. This started to build the idea of yellow peril in America, and I'm going to go into that in the later slides. And then during the Second World War, the United States and China became allies, and they supported the U.S. in winning the war. However, there were many Japanese individuals who were moved to internment camps during the Second World War in reaction to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. These were some of the main events that have transpired to perpetrate the yellow peril and model minority myth. Now to go into a bit more detail about the model minority myth. Asian and Asian Americans were considered the model minority after slavery was ended in the United States. They were the desirable classmate, the favored neighbor, and the non-threatening person of color. The model minority argument often privileges generations based on surface-level analysis at the expense of more refined and nuanced investigations. So yellow peril is the fear that other races, and in this case, the Asian and Asian American race, will take away from American jobs. This was legalized with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and is now propagated by a few world leaders, and currently this idealism still exists in American society today. How are Asian and Asian Americans being affected by racism? Xenophobia and racism are very similar, but racism has a broader meaning. Racism is the belief that race is the primary detriment of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of this particular race, while xenophobia is the fear and hatred of strangers and foreign things. The combination of the two spurs stigma between groups of people. In the recent year, the xenophobia and racism incidents against Asian and Asian Americans has increased since the pandemic began. Due to some governmental powers calling COVID-19 the Chinese virus, many people of Asian American descent and their physical looks have been attacked because they, quote-unquote, brought the virus to America. According to the World Health Organization Director General, stigma is more dangerous than the virus itself. This has shown to be true as many individuals of Asian and Asian American descent have been harassed and assaulted since the governmental powers have labeled COVID-19 as the Chinese virus. So now we're going to look into Asian Americans at Purdue specifically. Currently at Purdue, there are approximately 11,000 individuals that identify as Asian or Asian American. Currently at Purdue, there are not many courses offered on Asian and Asian American Pacific Islander culture or history. There is only one course, the Introduction to Asian American Studies, and it's the only course that is offered consistently at Purdue each semester. There are a couple of other classes that were offered in addition to the introductory course in the past years, but none of which were offered consistently like the introduction course. When looking at the other cultural studies courses, like the African Studies course list, there is a drastically larger course selection, even though in the year of 2019, there were only 1,261 Black or African American students at Purdue, while for Asian American Pacific Islander students, there were 3,760 students. So why is there a need for more training on Asian and Asian American Pacific Islander history and culture? At Purdue, The Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander individuals have the largest makeup of students and faculty after the white people. The increase for diversity and inclusion has only increased with the current events that have happened in society, like the racial bias incidents that have occurred towards Asian and Asian Americans due to COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement. There is also not a sufficient amount of courses or resources to support the amount of Asian and Asian American students and professional staff at Purdue. There has been an increase in Asian American students in professional staff and leadership positions, and there is not any training programs to help them develop their leadership styles at Purdue as well. Thank you for taking time today to listen to my scholarly project proposal. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, and please let me know if there are any questions. Thank you.